The continuously variable transmission promised smooth driving, better fuel economy, and fun performance. What they actually got were catastrophic failures, $7,000 repairs, noisy, buzzy engines, and transmissions that just don't inspire. Well, guess what? I'm going to share 7 of those absolutely horrific CVT transmissions you're going to want to avoid like the plague. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. One of the first transmissions you're going to want to avoid like the plague. If you're looking for an older used car, think about the Ford 500 or the Ford Freestyle. Yeah, an SUV that was a little bit heavy. Well, Ford partnered up with ZF, one of those German manufacturers, and created a product called the CVT-30, which was an early generation CVT transmission built between 2005 and 2007. And while Ford thought it was an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity to create something that was more economical and more practical, it was an absolute failure. Because in the CVT-30 transmission, you had a flow control valve, which unfortunately sometimes it would stick open, resulting in massive surges of pressure. You could actually have your foot down on the brake, and all of a sudden it just throttles and thrusts right into a busy intersection. Catastrophic by nature, junk by every account, and sadly the CVT transmission garnered one of the worst reputations when installed by ZF in these Ford Freestyles way back in the mid-2000s. The only place a CVT transmission should be installed is on an all-terrain vehicle, at the very most. Small, lightweight vehicle. Having it installed in one of these full-size, overweight, over-bloated barrage mobiles, definitely a big mistake, and one you will regret dearly because there is no fix. The Subaru Ascent is another catastrophe. 2019 to 2020 had their own CVT transmission. They coupled it with a massive SUV that was ginormous, and then they go and put this high torque turbo engine that created that nice torque hit. We know turbo engines created that fat torque at the bottom. The worst part is what it would do would snap and tug at the chain, and that chain would rattle and slap and drag across the cones. Well, what do you think when that happens? You have metal filings and chunks flying everywhere. Well, eventually those metal filings and shavings work their way through the oiling system, land up in the solenoids, burn them out, short them out, plug them off. Next thing you know, you've got bucking and lurching and jerking and outright catastrophic failure. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 repairs. The worst part is changing your fluid wasn't really even the solution when you had these high torque conditions constantly bearing down. Now, Subaru came up with a solution. There was a bit of a reprogram to reduce the amount of torque on that turbo boost, but really all you're doing is restricting and you're just buying time. It's a sad state of affairs when all they can do is put a band-aid on a poor design, and that's exactly what happened on this first generation Subaru Ascent, the TR690, which is really only second to some of the worst ones that I'm going to hit closer to the end of the list. The next car that has one of the worst CVT transmissions is Audi between 2009 and 2016, and it's bad enough that they had problems with oil burning and engines consuming oil and bad rings and needing overhauls and all kinds of problems with carbon fouling and oxygen sensors and the whole plethora. They also had a CVT transmission that were equipped on the A4s and the A6s on the front-wheel drive models only, called the Multitronic. It was a series of links, and Audi for some reason thought that it was inherently more robust. The worst part is they had a control board installed within the transmission called the TCM, the Transmission Control Module. The problem was, with all those excessive heat from the transmission generating over 200 degrees temperature imposing itself on that board, all of a sudden chips started to melt, solder joints started to melt, the transmission module started to fail. Next thing you know, you resulted in absolute catastrophic failure. Some of the first symptoms were that absolute boom! You'd go to accelerate and all of a sudden this thing would shake violently and aggressively, and you thought you were looking down the cone of a volcano when in fact, no, that was just your Audi trying to accelerate. Now, if you're looking at buying something with the Quattro, those use actual gears and you're in a much better place. But sadly, the CVT transmissions were equipped in some of the base lower trim levels of the A4 and the A6. Avoid them like the plague. Another one just gives me cold sweats thinking about it, stressing out, building anxiety. I have to go take medication just to calm down when I think about the 2002 to 2008 BMW Mini with the automatic. If you bought the stick shift, you were okay. That's why I always say drive manual if you can, but unfortunately the continuously variable transmission in this particular unit called the VT1, which was an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen. More failures than you can even talk about. The worst part is BMW said it's sealed for life like a lot of their automatic transmissions, and we've all learned already by now that that's clearly not adequate. It consists of these metal belts with metal bands that eventually break and crack down and split apart, blowing apart almost like an absolute bomb underneath your seat. You almost feel like you're back back end getting blown apart. You're wondering what's going on. Next thing you know, you just jig, and your car's slowing down because it finally let go. It took out the housing, it took out the pulleys, took out the belt, and even any sensors or electronics. You've literally destroyed the car. And the worst part is that early generation, first generation Mini aren't worth very much these days. You can find them for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and when you have to go and put an $11,000 CVT transmission in it, the math isn't mathing. It's an absolute brutal catastrophe and one I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Before we get into the next pile of disasters, drop a line. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Have you had vehicles with CVT transmissions, and what sort of mess have you had? Or have you found they've been fairly reliable? Some people say they've had success if you do frequent oil services. Sad part is many of these are considered for lifetime, and then people actually do that. Next thing you know, they burn out, they have problems, there's smoking, there's juddering, there's bucking, followed by no movement at all. You thought Nissan was the only one using one of those crappy Jatco transmissions, but Mitsubishi in the Outlander Sport decided to adopt the same transmission. It's called the JF011E, also utilized in Mitsubishi vehicles. 2011 to 2017, a lot of customers who bought these just didn't have the well-heeled bankroll to maintain these vehicles in the way that they probably needed. Now, unfortunately, they also didn't know when they went to sign on the dotted line to buy one of these vehicles that they would be in for a world of hurt. $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 repair. Unfortunately, many of these only after 4 or 5 years are only worth $3,000, $4,000, so it was virtually a write-off. By the time you hit 80 or 90 or 100,000 miles, these transmissions almost like clockwork catastrophically failed. And how was it? Well, there was an input shaft to the transmission that had a bearing around it. That bearing would start to prematurely wear down because it had too soft of metals. It would start to shake and rattle, and next thing you know, you get this crunching and rattling noise. It would start to squeal and howl, start burning the oil stops lubricating, you have one thing feeding another, and these transmissions would catastrophically fail. It didn't take very long. By the time you're at around 80, 90,000 miles, look out, the end was near for these Jatco transmissions found in these little Mitsubishis. The next one, you think of Jeep, you think of a vehicle that's sturdy, robust, capable of off-road, but sadly, there's a couple of Jeeps that can't do any of that. It's not even safe to drive on the street. The 2007 to 2016 Jeep Compass and Patriot unfortunately had an absolute catastrophic CVT transmission called the Jatco JF011E. When installed in these vehicles, you could literally be cruising down the highway doing 65 miles an hour. All of a sudden, the thermal management breaks down. It had no way of shedding its internal heat, particularly when you were loading. Maybe you were pulling your great little jet ski behind, or maybe you're trying to pull a little trailer, utility trailer with your remote lawnmower on top, and 65 miles an hour quickly becomes 18 miles an hour as this thing almost locks up, gives you a check engine light. It's an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen. Jatco transmission sounds common, sounds familiar. We'll get to more cars that use this very similar transmission. Buying a Jeep Compass, buying a Jeep Patriot, we know was a big mistake in the first place. We saw lots of them on the used car market, and unfortunately for a lot of you out there looking for a cheap used vehicle, if it's got a CVT transmission, you're guaranteed to spend $4,000, $5,000, maybe $6,000 retrofitting it. Those vehicles are only worth $1,500 to $2,000 on Marketplace. How can that make any sense? And we roll into one of the worst, most commonly well-known issues, and that's Nissan, the Rogue, as well as the Altima. Between 2013 and 2018, they created one of the worst automatic transmissions known to automotive kind, and we're talking about the CV8. You can find these cars with relatively low miles. They're very intriguing, and sadly, a lot of buyers and sellers like these cars. Sellers like them because they can sell them for cheap and they can move a lot of them. Buyers like them because they appear to be cheap. Owners eventually hate these vehicles because I've seen numerous one of these. By the time they've seen 80, 90, 100,000 miles, they're on their second or third transmission. It's a Jatco CV8, which has a catastrophic failure waiting to happen because the oil pump and the control valve, which drives the amount of pressure that goes through the oil pump to create that sheave, and that tightening of the sheave, which allows it to pick up, stops producing that pressure. Pressure drops, it doesn't pick up, it starts to slip, burn the oil. Next thing you know, there's all kinds of delay, and a catastrophic failure in one of these cars means that you're looking at potentially spending $7,000 or $8,000 or even more, $9,000 for replacement. This CVT by Nissan is one of those that garnered such a massive negative reputation for the brand. They're still trying to shake that off years later. The best thing I can advise is find something with a torque converter automatic transmission or a manual gearbox. Those are generally pretty robust. Any Nissan generally with that older generation CVT transmission is just a garbage can away from a catastrophic failure. Definitely want to avoid those like the plague. Please do drop a line and let me know how your CVT transmissions, if you've ever owned one, how it's been going. Right there, more positive recommendations, cars you definitely want to buy instead. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Catch you then. Bye-bye.